I once read a quote in a book by John Eldridge, and the quote said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs, ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I'm going to tell you in a snapshot what's happened in the last 7 years of my life now. And just to rewind 7 years ago, well, it's maybe even more than that, 8 years ago, I was living in the UK. I went to university in the UK. After university, I went over to America for a few months. I was a door-to-door salesman, knocking on people's doors in California and trying to sell them children's books. And I did that for a few months. I didn't really think it was a sustainable long-term career knocking on doors. So I came back to England and I became a geography teacher. And I was teaching geography for 2 years, which was a job I really, really enjoyed. I was teaching teenagers. It was a lot of fun. Every day was different. It was very hard. But I didn't really feel like it was what was going to make me come alive for the rest of my life. So I decided I wanted to go and explore the world, and I thought a good way to do that was to go and explore it on a bicycle. So I took my bicycle and I thought, rather than setting off from England and pedalling off into the world, I will fly as far away from home as I can think of, right to the other side of the world, and then I'll get off the plane and I'll cycle home again. That will be my adventure. So that's what I did. This is where I flew, to the northeast edge of Siberia, which was pretty much as far as I could think of, to a little town called Magadan. When I got to Magadan, I got off the plane and I started cycling. This is the route I took. I went down initially through Russia for 3 months, through Siberia, caught a ferry across to Japan, through Japan, then up through South Korea, then down through China to Hong Kong. That took me about a year, but then I decided to take a little detour. So I started hitchhiking on boats, kept going south through the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, halfway around Australia. That took an extra year, and then I came back up through places like Tibet, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, other areas of Central Asia, Iran, and then home through Europe, as you can see through Turkey there, and back to London. And that journey took about 3 years to get back, so it was a very long journey. There's another map, just so you can be clear. It was a very long journey. I'm not going to try and tell you everything that happened in that journey, but I am going to just tell you the first half of this talk. I'm going to tell you what happened in the first 3 months of that journey whilst I was in Russia, and you will see some of the experiences I had and some of the ways they perhaps shaped me and have led me off in all sorts of other directions, and the title of this talk, which is acquiring 2 accidental new careers, which is sort of what happened as a result of this. And I should also mention, when I was on this journey, I didn't have any aspirations to develop new careers from it. I just wanted to have an experience which would really test me to my limits, which would make me come alive, and which would really put me out of my comfort zone and stretch me a lot. So those were my main goals as I set off. And at the same time as going on this journey, I was also helping to raise money for a children's charity called Viva, who I will mention again briefly later on. So this is the day I set off on this bicycle ride. That's me on the left-hand side with my bike. It's just a normal mountain bike, but I do have lots of bags on the front and the back. And on the right-hand side is my old school friend Al, who I was cycling with whilst in Siberia. And you can notice it's a beautiful blue sky the day we set off. And this was September time, 2004, as we set off, and it looked like a perfect day to get going. That's the road we started out along, quite a nice smooth road, a tiny bit of snow on the mountains behind, but not too much to worry about. But it was really heading straight into the wilderness. And we met quite a lot of Russian people in the towns that we initially went through. And the Russian people were very friendly, and they would say to us, "Welcome to Russia, welcome to Siberia. We are so happy to have you visiting us here on your bicycles. Welcome, welcome, welcome. But why have you come in September? Because in 1 month, in October, the winter will arrive, and we think if you keep going, within 1 month, both of you will die. You will freeze to death in the winter." And so I started to get rather apprehensive about this. And then other Russians came up to us, they looked at our clothes and they said, "Well, if you have enough clothes, perhaps you will survive the cold, but we think it is far more likely you will get eaten by the bears. That's how you'll die." And so I was worrying about the bears, and then other people said, "No, not the bears, the wolves will eat you." And so I had this kind of long list of ways I was going to die, and they were all convinced we would die, they just couldn't decide how. And it was was with some trepidation, therefore, that we continued going, and sure enough, as they'd warned us, the winter did start to arrive. This was about less than a week into the journey. The snow started to arrive, the temperature started to drop. Here's a photo. You can see all the kind of things I had with me in those bags. There's my tent behind me, that's my house. Up towards the front is my kitchen, that silver object, that's my pots and pans. Inside the tent is my bedroom, a sleeping bag and a roll mat. Wearing loads of clothes, you can see. And in the other spare bag next to the tent, I had things like a first aid kit, a tool kit, a camera. I had a load of books because this was pre-Kindle days. I had a Bible. I'm a Christian. That's a very important source of strength for me. And we had the camera, so we were taking these pictures as we went along. But as we went along in the winter conditions, we found the initial problem wasn't so much the cold, because initially it was only about -5, not too bad, but the road started to get very icy and slippery. And as we cycled along, often suddenly my back wheel would slip out from under me and crash. I would fall down onto the road and usually slide along it and then have to pick up the bike, climb back on and keep on riding. And that sometimes happened about 5 times a day. We'd be slipping and crashing off the bike and nothing much we could do about it. We realised probably the nearest bike shop at this point was in Alaska, and so we weren't going to get any new tyres. Further and further we went, more and more into the wilderness. Sometimes now we were seeing almost no people for several days at a time. Some days we didn't see a single car, a single person, a single house, just total desolate emptiness that we were going on, and the temperature just kept getting colder and colder until one morning we got off the bike, looked at the thermometer on my handlebars, and the temperature had dropped. You can see from 0 at the top down to -10, 20, 30, 40, -40 degrees, which is in fact where centigrade and Fahrenheit meet. So -40, whichever way you look at it. And this was a serious amount of cold. If you're interested to know what it feels like at -40, little experiment you can do later when you go home. Open your freezer door, put your hand in to get your ice cream out of the freezer. Try and remember that now. That's about -20 in your freezer. So now I want you to double how cold your hand feels, down to -40. Got that? And now keep your hand in there for about 6 months. And now you're getting the idea of what it's like in a Siberian winter. And it doesn't really make life any easier. The water in our water bottles was freezing in less than a minute. Plastic things become very brittle, so they all started breaking in our equipment. One day my friend Al had a cold and his nose was dripping, and you can see the results, these beautiful icicle bogies. Well, as we continued along, I mentioned before, we met very, very few people, but sometimes we met some quite unusual people. One day we heard a rumbling sound, and this tank was coming down the road behind us, actually not the army, some friendly Russian gold miners. Here is a little gold mine by the road, and we were always really excited when we saw a house or any sort of habitation, especially, you can see a little bit of smoke coming out of the chimney there, which meant it was warm inside. And if we saw something like that, we'd put down our bikes, we'd go up and we'd knock on the door. We wanted to get out of the cold. Usually somebody would open the door, be a bit surprised, but then they'd say, come in, invite us into the house. Then they'd say, sit down, so we'd sit down in the house. Then they'd put a whole load of food on the table and they'd say, eat, 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 so we'd eat lots of their tasty food. And then they would say, don't go back outside, it's far too cold for camping tonight. Why don't you stay the night with us, we'll look after you. Tomorrow morning you can keep going on your crazy bike ride. And the thing was, this didn't just happen once or twice on this journey. It happened almost every week I was in Russia, and actually almost every week of the entire expedition, I found total strangers were looking after me like this. And that was a huge, huge experience for me in terms of learning about that incredible hospitality you can find when you go out into the world. I did also meet some less friendly people from time to time. I was robbed at gunpoint once. I was chased by some guys with knives once, a very, very occasional, highly scary situations. But the vast, vast majority of the time, vast majority of people in every country were very friendly and helpful. Well, we made it down to Japan, and I cycled through there. I was hoping I'd escape from the winter now, but this was Japan when I arrived. Still a lot of snow up there. And here was the rain arriving, me and Al with our raincoats on now. But this photo was taken just a couple of days before me and Al decided to part ways and cycle different routes. Al went on across west across China, and I headed south down towards Australia. And it was